Alright, table of contents today is similar figures. I think it's going to take one page. It may take two, so we may have to go back and change that. Remember, you can pause, fast forward, rewind anytime that you need to if I am going too fast. Here is your title, also similar figures, and these are the first two things that we're going to talk about. What makes shapes similar. Get this written and we'll get started. You can draw these two triangles as well. Pause it if you need to do that. So let's look at these two triangles, and the questions are what makes shapes similar? Angles have to be congruent, meaning equal, and sides have to be proportional. So let's name these two triangles. The small triangle on the left, we are going to name that triangle A, B, C. Okay, and the larger triangle on the right, let's name that D, E, F. Okay, so those triangles do have names. The small one is triangle ABC. The large one is triangle DEF. So, are the angles congruent? Are there angles in here that are equal? Yes. Angle B of the small triangle and angle E of the large triangle are congruent. These are also called corresponding. Meaning they match. Corresponding angles. Finding corresponding angles helps you set up a proportion that you will need to solve missing parts of shapes. There are also corresponding sides. Okay, so if you find the angle first, corresponding sides, I'm going to use a highlighter, would be, this is called the hypotenuse because it's opposite of the largest angle. Those would be corresponding because they're opposite of the 90-degree angle. Also, the height would be corresponding like that. And the longest, technically that's not the longest, the hypotenuse is. But the other angle, or the base, is also corresponding. So those are corresponding sides. Alright, so I drew two triangles here, and I wrote down three questions. The three questions are they similar? Angles congruent? Sides proportional? So go ahead and get these drawn. The smaller triangle has sides of 4, 6, and 7. A 90-degree angle, a 50-degree angle, and a 40-degree angle. The larger triangle has sides of 8, 12, and 14. A 90-degree angle, a 50-degree angle, and a 40-degree angle. And then those three questions, are they similar? Are the angles congruent? Are the sides proportional? We're going to answer all three of those questions. So get that drawn and then let's talk about it. Alright, so first let's look at the angles, see if the angles are congruent. Remember, the word congruent just means equal. Okay, so we've got an angle here, which is a 90, an angle here, which is a 90. Those would be corresponding angles like we talked about before. So those are congruent. And on the smaller triangle, you can see that the smallest angle is 40. I will highlight that as well. Is 40. And on the largest triangle, or the larger triangle, the smallest angle is also 40. So those are congruent. Because those two are congruent, the third one has to be congruent. But just to make sure, the other, I guess the middle angle is what you would call it, is, oops, I did not mean to do that. The middle angle is 50, and same thing on the small one. So Are the angles congruent? Yes, it is. So now we need to see if sides are proportional. So think back. We are going to make a ratio first, just with labels. So we have a small triangle and a large triangle. So I'm going to do small to large. Now you could just put an S and an L if you want to. Nobody's going to require you to spell everything out. Okay, at least I don't think so. Alright, so now let's look at these sides. We have to find the sides that correspond with each other. Okay, so I'm going to highlight those. If you focus on the angles, so let's look between the 90-degree angle and the smallest angle. Okay, between the 90-degree angle and the smallest angle. Here's the 90, and there's the smallest angle. So that's on the large triangle. So the large would be 12. And we have to use the corresponding side on the small triangle. So from the 90-degree angle to the 40-degree angle. So on the small triangle, it would be 6. We're going to set up our proportion here. And now let's go to, let's go between the 90-degree angle and the 50-degree angle, right there. So the large would be 8. And let's go to the small one, and we've got to stay between the same two angles, the 90-degree and the 50-degree. And that would be 4. So some of you can already tell that yes, it is proportional. Why? Because 6/12 or 6/212, because it's a ratio, is really just half. And 4/8 or 4/2/8, because it's a ratio, is really just half also. But remember, we can check it by using our cross products, by multiplying diagonally. And if those values are the same, then we know that that they are proportional, meaning equal. Okay, so 12 times 4 is 48, and 8 times 6 is also 48. So are the sides proportional? Yes, they are. So are these figures similar? Yes, they are. So that's not bad, and we're going to use similar figures to find some missing parts of things, of real life things, but right now we're going to do some more triangle and shape work to find missing sides. So here's an example with a couple of rectangles. Go ahead and get these drawn. We're going to answer the exact same questions that we answered on the first one. But notice we have an X in this. It means we just have a missing value. Okay, so we've got to answer: are the angles congruent? Are the sides proportional? So are the figures similar? Get these two rectangulars. Get these two rectangles drawn, and we will find the missing part. All right, so back to proportions that we did what, Thursday or Friday, or Thursday and Friday, I don't remember. Anyways, we talked about they're going to give us 3 parts in proportional word problems. We just have to find one, so we get 75% of the information. We just have to find one thing, which is 25% out of that. So anyway, so let's answer some questions first. Are the angles congruent? Well, if you look at all of the angles inside of the small one and the large one, they all have the 90-degree symbol. So yes, they are all congruent. Okay, I guess I will write that up there in a different color. Yes, they are. Okay, so now we need to see if the sides are proportional. And so how do we do that? Well, what 2 things are we talking about? We're talking about a small rectangle and a large rectangle. So I've got a small, and I'm just going to do an S this time. Small and large. So now we're going to set up our blank proportion right there. Anything on the small triangles, or excuse me, rectangle is going to go on the top, and anything from the large rectangle is going to go on the bottom. So now we have to find corresponding sides. Excuse me. So we see that the short side on the small triangle is 12, right there. And the short side on the large triangle is 48. So those are corresponding sides. So small is 12 and large is 48. Alright, so our two other corresponding sides, because they are rectangles, these will match. The large side is 14 on the small rectangle, and our missing value is the large side of x on the large rectangle. So the small is on top, 14, and the large is on the bottom, x. Okay, so now we're just back to what we did last week, which is no big deal. Proportions aren't that bad. You just have to be able to set them up correctly. That's number one. So we've got 3 out of 4 values over here. Remember from last week, we multiply what we can. We can multiply 48 and 14, and then we divide by the number that's left over, and that is 12. Okay, so we're going to do 48 times 14, and then just divide that by 12. That's every proportion you will get. 48 times 14, 4 times 8 is 32, 16, 17, 18, 19. Don't forget that placeholder because you multiplied the 4, or the 1's place. And then 1 times 48 is just 48. Add them up, 2, 17, 4, 5, 6, 672. So a little refreshment from last week. Remember, what does x times 12 have to equal? It has to equal 672. So 12 times x equals 672. Okay, so think back to your fact families, back in elementary school, 12 times x equals 672. That means 672 divided by x equals 12. Or, easier, 672 divided by 12 equals x. 672 divided by 12 equals x. I know that 12 times 4 is 48, so 12 times 5 is 60. So it's going to go in there 5 times. Subtract, bring that 2 down, and we end up with a 2. I also know that 12 goes into 72 6 times, because 72 inches is 6 feet. So 12 times 6 is 72. So what is the value of x? X equals 56. I'll just write it up here. 56. Okay. So just because these are shapes doesn't mean it's any different than the word problems that you did on your assignment last week. It's no different than that problem about red and blue paint, except for it's not giving it to you in a word problem, it's giving it to you in a picture. Okay, so for those of you that are more pictorial learners, maybe this will help you out. Maybe this will be easier for you. We're going to do one more. Actually, we're not going to do one more. I'll just make another video. We'll have a couple of the problems from your assignment on there, because they're not always this simple. Sometimes you may get a problem, and I need you to think about this before we get to our next assignment. You may end up with a problem like this, where one rectangle is that way, and you have to find out if it is a similar figure compared to a rectangle that is that direction. So that's why it's very, very important to be able to find our corresponding angles and sides. So don't fret. Look for the next video. We'll do 2 or 3 word problems together.